In the cold, crushing darkness of space, there is no margin for error. And yet, the difference between a mission's triumph and tragedy has sometimes come down to a sandwich. How? NASA has pulled off some of the most extraordinary feats in human history, but behind every mission that made it into the history books, there are stories that almost didn't make it at all. Stories of freak accidents, impossible decisions made in seconds, and moments where the entire course of history hung by a thread. These are the missions that should have ended in disaster, and the remarkable reasons they didn't. Starting with the $30 million space sandwich that triggered a literal congressional investigation. In 1965, John Young boarded Gemini 3 with a secret hidden in his spacesuit, a corned beef sandwich. He was taking a massive risk because his commander, Gus Grissom, was already tired of eating freeze-dried paste on board. 2 hours into orbit, Young pulled out the sandwich, but the second Grissom took a bite, the mission turned into a crisis. Crumbs didn't fall, they drifted. Thousands of tiny shards of rye bread began floating toward the oxygen vents and critical electrical switches. NASA had spent millions to keep the cabin sterile. Now the entire spacecraft was being sabotaged by a deli lunch. When they returned, Congress was furious, launching a formal investigation into what they called the $30 million sandwich. From there on, NASA enforced a strict no-crumb policy in space. Young was officially reprimanded, but that was not the end of his story. 16 years later, he commanded the first-ever space shuttle mission, and that time, corned beef was officially on the menu. So NASA learned to control what goes inside the cockpit. But 4 years later, they discovered there was something they couldn't control at all: the sky itself. November 14, 1969, Apollo 12, carrying a 3-person crew, lifted off from Florida beneath storm-laden skies. Only 36 seconds after launch, as millions watched live, the first lightning strike hit. Just 16 seconds later, a second strike hit the spacecraft. A life-threatening failure seemed imminent, but a quick decision by a 24-year-old NASA flight controller calling for an obscure switch allowed the astronauts to regain control and somehow make a successful landing on the moon, one of the last few humanity would make before the program was canceled entirely. Apollo 12 made it to the moon and back. But what happens when the mission goes perfectly and there's no home left to return to? In 1991, cosmonaut Sergei Krikalev launched for a routine mission, but while he circled the Earth, the Soviet Union was falling apart. Funding ran out, flights were delayed, and Krikalev couldn't come home. He remained in orbit while his country ceased to exist. For 311 days, he lived in space, watching the world change below him, not knowing when he'd return. When he finally landed, the Soviet Union was gone. He had left Earth a Soviet citizen. He came back Russian. He survived the isolation, but his story remains the ultimate testament to how fragile our connection to Earth really is. 3 missions, 3 moments where it all should have ended. A sandwich, a lightning strike, and a man who had to come home to a country that no longer existed. Every mission that has ever launched carried with it 1,000 ways to fail, and the extraordinary belief that humans could overcome every single one of them. Somehow, remarkably, they always do. Facts brings you front row seats to the untold stories of history. Hit subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.